Good afternoon, everyone. I will now call this Intertownship Joint Board of Management meeting to order at 2 p.m. We'll start with the land acknowledgement statement. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the Three Fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi Nation, who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewas of Saugeen and the Chippewas of Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and live in peace and friendship with all its diverse peoples. Moving on to the agenda, are there any additions to the agenda today? Seeing none, I will read the recommendation that the agenda be approved as presented. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Shirley and Grant. Is there any discussion? I will call the vote. All in favor? It's carried. Is there any declaration of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, you may declare at any time if one should arise throughout the meeting. Minutes of previous meetings. The recommendation is that the minutes of the Intertownship Joint Board of Management meeting held April 16th, 2024 be approved. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Will and Rick. Is there any discussion? We'll call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. For delegations and public question period, for items on the agenda, any person who wishes to appear before the board regarding an item on the agenda shall make written application to the clerk by 10 a.m. the day of the meeting. To register, go to www.georgianbluffs.ca/delegations or call the clerk's office at 519-376-2729, extension 603. And for items that are not on the agenda, the same as previous, but you need to register by the Thursday preceding the meeting you wish to speak at. And today we have BDO with us with their 2023 draft audited financial statements. And our recommendation is that the 2023 audited draft financial statements prepared by BDO Canada LLP be received for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Steve and Grant, and I will turn it over to Tracy for the presentation. And both of you are doing it, I take it.
I'd like to thank the board. I'm Robin Strangway-Calder, a senior manager with BDO, and I'm going to be doing the presentation today. I do have Tracy Smith, the engagement partner, with me, who I expect you all know. I have been with BDO for about 15 years, and I've worked on the Intertownship Fire Department audit for about 10 of those years. We would like to thank your entire management team for their assistance during the audit. Especially like to thank Samantha. If you do have any questions during the presentation, please feel welcome to stop me at the time I'm going over the material. As your auditor, it is our responsibility to communicate with those charged with governance, in this case, the board. Our report in the agenda package contains all required communication in accordance with Canadian auditing standards. It is similar to prior years. So if we can jump to page 3, I'll just give a brief summary of the letter from BDO. The status of the audit at this time is that the financial statements are in a draft form until they are approved by the joint board. Speaking about independence, preparation of the financial statements, including all the disclosures in the notes, is the responsibility of your management team. Although we can assist in formatting and making suggestions on wording, all of the numbers are provided by your management team for the from the accounting records of the department. BDO, as your auditor, is required to maintain independence to be able to provide an independent audit opinion on the financial statements. And I can confirm that BDO is independent to provide that opinion that's included in Appendix B. Materiality for the audit remained at $30,000. On page 7 of this communication, we do report that there were no internal control issues noted during the audit. On page 8, there is an unadjusted difference. It's due to the timing of payables. It was not material, and so we can issue an audit opinion. If there's no questions about the communication, I'd suggest we flip to Appendix A, page 2, for the audit opinion. Unlike in prior years, we have qualified our opinion for 2023. Under the basis of for qualified opinion section, the department was required to adopt PS 3280 asset retirement obligations, which requires the recognition of legal obligations associated with the retirement of tangible capital assets by public sector entities. Management has not completed its assessment of the tangible capital assets for potential asset retirement obligations. As a result, it is not possible to quantify the impact of this departure from Canadian public sector accounting standards. In the second paragraph, you will see that in our opinion, except for the asset retirement obligation, the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position of the Inter-Township Fire Department as at December 31st, 2023. I'd like to note that management intends to address the asset retirement obligation at the same time as the planned facilities review, because there will be a lot of overlapping information requirements. On the next page, there's an expanded explanation of the responsibilities of the auditor, the management, and the board. At the top of the report, it highlights that management is responsible for the preparation and fair presentation of these financial statements. And it also highlights that those charged with governance are responsible for overseeing the organization's financial reporting process. The remainder then details the responsibilities of the auditor. If there's no questions at this time, I'd like us to go to the statement of financial position on page 5. The statement of financial position is also known as the balance sheet. In accordance with the new agreement for the joint management and operation of the Inter-Township Fire Department, all reserve funds for unspent capital that have been held by the member municipalities in the past will be transferred to the Inter-Township Fire Department on an annual basis as budgeted. Therefore, there is no longer the accounts receivable for future capital shown separately, and we did reclassify the prior year accounts receivable balances to agree to this presentation. Financial assets totaled $912,000 with $442,000 in cash. Total liabilities were $265,000 with net financial assets coming to $647,000, which is an increase of $28,000 over the prior year. The 2022 column has been restated to reflect the $26,000 paid before December 31st, 2022 that relates to insurance premiums from January to July of 2023. And the tangible capital assets were $1.7 million, which brings accumulated surplus to $2.48 million. I'd like to note that in note 3, it breaks down the accumulated surplus further, which is made up of capital assets of $1.79 million, capital reserves of $814,418, which is up from the $738,000 in the prior year. Working capital remains at $150,000, and the accumulated deficit is $274,000. On the next page is the statement of operations and accumulated surplus. It shows the transactions for the year. Revenue includes both capital and operating. It does not include transfers from reserves. Total revenue for 2023 was $1.2 million. You will notice that this includes total fire call revenue of $318,000 with all the fire call revenue combined, which is higher than budget, and it corresponds to the increase in wages that you may notice in the expenditures line. Other revenue does include proceeds from insurance. which corresponds to the increase in the employee safety equipment expense line, which was used to replace damaged equipment. Total expenses were $1.3 million. It does not include transfers to reserves or capital purchases. It does include amortization expense, which is not included in the budget column. The annual deficit for the year was $80,745. The annual deficit on this statement is reported under PSAB, and it is not the operating deficit. For 2023, the operating deficit was $49,304. The overall accumulated deficit is $274,579, and this has built up annually year over year since 2020. And looking forward, the board should decide how to finance this deficit. If there's no questions, that was the overview of the financial statements that I had. Would anyone like to go over anything further?
Dave, go ahead.
Thank you. If I may bother you for a minute, there's a couple things I just want a clarification on. I guess on page 16, due from me for $266,000 that's higher than Georgian Bluffs. Have we not paid a bill? Have we been invoiced? Do we need to get onto this?
So I believe it's the unspent capital from prior years that still hasn't been cash flowed from Meaford to Inner Township Fire Department. I don't know if it's been cash flowed since December 31st, 2023, but as at the year end.
Has it been invoiced and has it been looked at?
So through your chair, we have been in communications with Meaford's treasurer to try and have this addressed. When I last looked at the account, it had not been paid at that time, but I will touch base with them again this week.
So will I. If I may, another question on page 17, other revenue, 89,000, is that insurance? That's
Primarily, yes, it
insurance
includes,
payout.
yeah, $77,000 was insurance, and I believe there was also interest revenue in there.
So you mentioned amortization is on the profit and loss, but it wasn't in the budget. Henceforth, that is the biggest reason we have the deficit. Okay, correct?
Amortization doesn't create an operating deficit.
Well, yeah, it should be on the balance sheet, but it does come into our, does it not affect our deficit that we're trying to make up now for 274,000? Nothing to do with that at all.
Correct.
Thank you. I knew I missed it in there somewhere. So let's go to this is another topic after this. Okay, I want to talk about the unfunded deficit that we have to make a decision on, but that's in another topic after your presentation. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Shirley, go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chair Carlton. And I was going to ask about the deficit as well, and just curious if we could have a little bit more information on how we got there, and is it related to the increased number of calls, or were there unexpected expenses that led to the 49,000?
It may be worth going to Appendix D where there are highlights, and this breaks out the operating from capital a little bit better to see. Of your agenda package, I'm sorry, I don't have that noted.
Sam's gonna bring it up here, I think.
Yes.
You had surpluses back in 2018, 2019, and those amounts. When you had surpluses at that time, the surpluses were transferred to the capital reserve. And so then in 2020 is when you started to have some operating deficits. So in 2020, you had $130,000 in an operating deficit, 17,000 in 2021, 76,000 in 2022, and 40,000 in 2023. So if you add those all together, that is the accumulated 274,000 that needs to be addressed.
So I think that is coming up after this. So perhaps we could just shelve that question until we get to that point in the agenda and then have discussion at that point. Okay. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I am not seeing any.
Thank you for having us this afternoon.
Thank you for being here, both of you. And I will call the question now. All those in favor? Sorry, I see questions over here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just really not comfortable with this deficit number and I need more information to understand it.
At this point, the recommendation on the floor is that we would receive the audited draft financial statements for information. So at this point, we're not accepting them, and I'm looking at Sam. We're just receiving them for information, and we're going to deal with the deficit at a later point here.
So through you, there is a report later on today's agenda where we can discuss the deficit a bit more. I do recognize that there are concerns around the amount, but is that stopping you from approving the financials?
Go ahead.
I think Shirley's question is not the overall deficit over the 5 years. This year, so let's pick on this year's 49,000. Why did we have a deficit? Well, if the expenses were higher than the revenues, and you can go through each line. We can pick apart each line and try to get an answer to them if that's what you're thinking.
Is that what you're looking for, is to determine that now?
Chair Colton, I'm comfortable to accept the report as presented for information at this point, and I know we'll have further discussion there.
Okay, so does anybody want me to read that recommendation again? Okay, I will call the vote then. All in favor? That's carried. So then moving on, we have no correspondence. Item 8.1 is Fire Chief's report, and the recommendation is that the Intertownship Board of Management receive report ITFD-2024-05 for information. But I have a mover and a seconder, please. Shirley and Steve, and I will turn it over to Jeff to speak to this.
Yeah, just a quick overview of just want to talk a little bit about the calls, the increase in calls. I did have a chance. I went back through and reviewed 23 and 24. There's nothing really outstanding for increases, like in one area other than false alarms, CO calls. There was an increase of those of 13 calls. Everything else seems to be just one or two consistently higher, and why that trend is, I don't understand. Our medicals are actually, we're on the same number of medicals this year as we were last year at this time, so there's no increase on the medical side. So why the call volume's increasing, it's a little bit in every area. And so just for that information. And then with regards to the fire inspections, this year he's at he's done 111 inspections this year up to date, and last year he was in the high 90s. So he's got a few more inspections this year as well.
Thank you, Rick. You have questions?
Hey, just as a point of clarification, and I think we discussed this at Georgian Bluffs Council, though, that the board here is not responsible for fire prevention. Each municipality is doing it separately, right? So I think it's good to talk about it here, but that's really something that should come back to each council of what's going on in fire prevention as opposed to the board, because the board doesn't pay for fire prevention. The townships pay for fire prevention individually. Meaford does theirs separately than Georgian Bluff. So it's just something I saw here that looks like we're starting to overlap again. Just thought I would clarify that.
Thank you. Will, did I see you have a question?
Sure. I was just wondering when the agreement took place or who's actually doing inspections. There was a lull, and I have not seen or heard anything where an agreement is taking place, or is it one of our own members? I am at a loss of that. If I get clarification, I'd appreciate that.
Brittany, can you speak to this one? I can sort of, but you might be better.
So previously there was an agreement drawn with the city of Owen Sound to contract inspection and prevention services through the township of Georgian Bluffs. I believe in speaking on the spot that that agreement has since lapsed and is now on the radar of our CEO and our fire department to have renewed. And it was a budgeted for expense in 2024 through the township.
Did we not just do an agreement with Owen Sound? Yes, we've just finalized an agreement with Owen Sound where they are providing 2 days a week, 1 day a week. And yeah, so that is a new agreement. I think that took over from, we had an agreement sort of in place that I think happened around the time the 10th Street Bridge was, and we were providing coverage for the city, and in return, they provided fire prevention for us. So that has now become a new agreement between City of Owen Sound and Georgian Bluffs. And Meaford looks after their own fire prevention. Does that answer the question now? Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Brent?
Sure, not really, just a curiosity question more than anything to the chief. Public hazards, what would be an example of a hazard?
Public hazard could be down hydro wires, like maybe a gas leak, something in that nature.
Hey, if there are no other questions, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Next item is item 8.1.2, the HVAC installation. Recommendation is that the ITFD board approves the amount of $17,280 plus HST from the approved capital to install HVAC system improvements in 2024, and that the ITFD board award this work to Ken Philp Climate Control. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Rick? Shirley? And before I go to anyone speaking, can we change that to Ken Philp? Take that second I out, not Philip. Okay. Anyone reporting on this one or speaking to it? Does the board have any questions? Did you have your hand up, Rick? Oh, no questions? I will call the vote then. All in favor? That is carried. And on to treasurer reports. Recommendation that the Intertownship Joint Board of Management receive report COR 2024-026 for information. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Steve and Grant, and I will turn to Samantha.
Thank you, and through you. So this is your 2024 to date financial update. I do just want to highlight that the actuals are reflective of what had been paid, not necessarily what had been incurred. So when I say that June fire calls that would have occurred will not be reflected in any of the volunteer time that is there. The volunteer number of the 220,000 is strictly for calls that occurred from January 1st to May 31st. So unfortunately, when we're looking at financials, there can be some timing delays around that. Overall, we do have for our administration expenditures, year-to-date actuals are less than implied year-to-date budget due to insurance renewal that does not take place until July. We have been speaking to insurance and are going to be renewing on a stub period to change that to coincide with not only the ITFD operation year, but a calendar year, that a full renewal would take place in January, which will then assist in eliminating why our financials had to be reclassified around that. Again, volunteers, that is for year-to-date actuals are over implied budget. We did pay out the total annual clothing allowance pursuant to the collective agreement earlier this year. There is some, again, the timing delay around the volunteer salaries that will play a factor. It's something we're going to continue to monitor moving forward. There may depend, as you've seen earlier, the call volume has increased. There may be some financial implications for salaries around that too. We will monitor and report back to the board. Communications, you do have that your year-to-date actuals are over your implied year-to-date budget. You had paid for the annual dispatch agreement and radio licenses. Our budget doesn't at this time coincide exactly with when expenditures are. We typically take that and give it an equal monthly amount. When we are looking at staff safety, your year-to-date actuals are over the implied year-to-date budget. Our fire chief had tried to purchase as much early in the year because historically there had been timing delays for when materials had been purchased opposed to when they arrived. So we have overspent on that. There are no large purchases planned at this time for the remainder of the year. There may be small incremental purchases required though. When we are looking at the fire hall, part of your difference between actuals and budget is again around your insurance. When we are looking at fleet for accounting purposes, we can't net revenue expenses. So there were some carry forward from the vehicle that was included in the collision that we had expenses around that. There is the offsetting insurance. We have not received all of those insurance funds yet. So, but we will be getting more funds from insurance to offset those expenses. When we are looking at the revenue side, we have invoiced your total capital to both municipalities, and that is the annual amount. That is the amount that will be going directly into your reserves and play into your 10-year capital plan. NTO fire calls, we do our best to try and guess what they will, but we have no way of knowing when accidents may occur. So there typically is a difference between budget and actuals when we're looking at there. The actuals are also only indicative of fire calls that occurred from January 1st to May 31st. So there is that extra month's worth of budget in there than what has actually been invoiced out. And when we're looking at miscellaneous, this is where part of that offsetting insurance proceeds that you have received for the fire truck is included, as well as your bank interest. And we have seen higher prime interest rates than historically and then what we were anticipating for budget. I'm happy to answer any more questions if there are.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? And that has carried. Next item under Secretary Reports, the recommendation is that the Intertownship Fire Department Board approves funding the total general deficit of $274,579 from the future capital reserve for the 2024 year end. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Steve and Grant, and I will turn to Samantha first, I think, and then we will go to the board for questions.
Yes, and through you. So as you saw in your audited financial statements, we do have a large carry forward deficit, operating deficit. Included in the report, there is the summary. So this deficit started to stem in 2020. This is also during the period of when we kind of put a hold on drastic increases to the budget, pending the Meaford Georgian Bluffs review of ownership. So we were trying to limit that. Unfortunately, in 2020, we also experienced COVID. And with that, there was an unexpected amount of increases around call volume that no one could have foreseen when preparing the budget. Because of the agreement, the deficit had stayed on your financials until now. You do have the new agreement now, which does speak to the deficits are to be funded from your reserves, which is what staff are proposing. But you do have some other options available to you if you do not wish to go with the funding from reserves. You do have the option of requesting the proportional split of the unfunded deficit from each participating municipality that will have financial, word just escaped me. Thank you. Repercussions, thank you. To each municipality, which I can't quantify or elaborate at this level. You do also have the option to leave it as unfunded. I would discourage you from doing that, as it is a large amount that we want to try to clean up and address now, with the hope and expectation that it does not continue to happen. Happy to answer questions. I know there was one that kind of came up earlier around where this came from.
Steve, then Shirley.
Thank you. I had a question, basically on page 1 of this report. We are not including 2018 and 2019 surpluses in the 274, or to be 150,000 deficit. Why aren't we including them too?
So because 2018 and 2019 were in a surplus position, for the financial purposes, they were transferred to reserves. They have already been moved to your reserves, that they've been addressed.
Okay,
Exactly.
so they went to reserves, now you want to take it back out. So 2022 prior period resettlement was a plus, and you used it in the total.
Yes, so the 2022 prior period statement is reflective in the financials. We saw that we did the adjustment that affected prior periods for the insurance. So had we had that done in our 2022, that would have meant that our 2022 deficit would have been the 50,036 had that adjustment been completed in 2022.
I'm fine with that, and I'm fine with paying the deficit off through reserves. I'm just wondering how we can we get control of each year's budget, make sure that we don't keep on having deficit. That's I think Shirley's question, and also mine.
Shirley.
Thanks, Chair Carlton, and absolutely, I agree with Member Bartley that we should go forward and fund this from the capital reserve. I have a better understanding. Thank you, Samantha, for how we got to where we are with that amount, and I'm sure, in particular during the years of COVID, there were additional expenses that couldn't have been anticipated, and I'd also like to see us, hopefully, again, as you suggested, get a handle on the budget. I did have just one question in relation to the province, and I saw in the chart that they are a little late paying. I know that's not part of the budget, but I just wondered while I have the microphone, if you could speak a little bit to where we are with those provincial payments.
So each month we do send the MTO, the province, their revenue or the call revenue that they are required to pay to us. Yes, there is a delay. Typically, it is about a month behind from when we invoice and when we get the money. If they do need to investigate a call, then they may withhold those funds and request further information from that. But overall, we are comparable to where we were around year end at this time. Year end had approximately $11,000 outstanding. And unfortunately, the information I have in front of me, I can't pinpoint if all of that 11 has been cleaned up, that this is new 2024 calls. But this money is.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. Next item is the 2025 board meeting schedule. The recommendation is that the 2025 board meeting schedule be approved as presented, and that the board secretary be authorized to carry out all administrative actions necessary to call the meetings contained herein. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Shirley and Steve. And is anyone speaking to this one? Carly, over to you.
Thank you, Chair Carlton. So in keeping with previous years, we are recommending that the board continue to meet on the second Tuesday every quarter at 2 p.m. So that's in accordance with the new agreement. So the proposed meeting dates are January 14th, 2025 at 2 p.m., April 15th, 2025 at 2 p.m., July 15th, 2025 at 2 p.m., and October 14th, 2025 at 2 p.m. If the board does have conflicts and we're unable to obtain quorum for those dates, we can certainly amend the schedule as the board requires.
Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor? That is carried. No unfinished business, no new business, board inquiries and comments. Does any member of the board wish to provide a comment or an inquiry today? Rick.
Thanks, Sue. Just through you to either Jeff or Andy there, just can we get an update on the drainage works that were done at the hall? Just were they in line with what we expected? Did they find anything that was unexpected? How did that all finish? And just an update, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so the work has been completed. They did find a crack on the, I guess, the southwest corner. And that leak was, that was the only crack they did find. There was other little cracks that were eventually going to pose a problem. So the moisture got in behind. So they got that crack repaired, re-asphalted. There's a couple spots that we have to get addressed with the asphalt. And the grass is growing now. So yeah, no water in the basement as of now, but yes, they did a good job in getting it back up. So there's only one spot that was bad.
Excellent. Any other questions? Okay, no closed session. Date of the next regular meeting will be October 15th at 2 p.m. I will now call for adjournment of this meeting. Could I have a mover and a seconder? Rick and Grant, all in favor? That is carried. Thank you, everyone.